Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time, rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to author Lindsey Kinsella from Scotland by Skype with the Lazarus Taxa. It's 60 million years into the past, deep time, and the true final frontier. But what will be most dangerous? The dinosaurs or the people? Thank you for joining us. How are you today, Lindsey?
I am very good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. How did you come up with this story? It was a great adventure. You seem to know a lot about dinosaurs, paleontology.
Yeah, that was definitely my starting point. That was where I kind of came up with the idea for, ever since I was young. I was, a huge dinosaur geek. And I think there came a point where I needed an outlet for that. I had to get that out somehow. And yeah, that was the basis of the story to begin with. And everything that sprouted from that just kind of came as I wrote. So, I wanted to show a little variation in media compared to what we're usually shown. I think a lot of dinosaur depictions at the moment are kind of outdated, and it was nice to show something different.
It was definitely different. So tell me a little bit about your background. Because there was a lot of... Oh, sorry, but there were just a lot of nautical terms throughout.
Yes, I am a naval architect by trade. So I design ships. I work in a shipyard. I have done now for 7 or 8 years. So yeah, there is a nautical background, which is it was nice to incorporate that. And I think you're often told to write what you know.
That's true. Is that how you develop the facility where all of this starts from?
In a lot of ways, yes. Particularly, or kind of, there's a part in the facility which we call the hangar. That was very much shipyard based. In my mind, that was very much a kind of a construction bay. And equally the time machine itself, which we're introduced to, very much had a sort of industrial ship theme to it. So yeah, that was quite intentional.
Well, traveling so far back in time, it definitely needed a good structure. Not to mention that, they did come in a couple of situations with dinosaurs.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to, partly to make sure that it was realistic that such a structure could survive partly the trip and also the trip, the time spent there. It had to be solid and kind of rugged. But I also liked the idea that because it was quite a new technology, that it wasn't very sleek. It wasn't pretty. It was kind of just all cobbled together because it was new and they hadn't worked out all of the kinks yet.
Wow. Now, what about the research involved? Because I did double check a lot of the things you said about different dinosaurs that would have been available during that era. And everything matched. So I felt like I got a little lesson in dinosaurs.
That was, I think that was originally what I really wanted to do with the book. I wanted to tell a great story, obviously, but I wanted the reader to come away having learned a little something. So yeah, there was a lot of research. I think I probably started researching this book about 20 years before I decided I was going to write it, just because that's always fascinated me. I've always had a huge interest in dinosaurs. So I think it helped with the research that I had a good foundation of knowledge to build on. But yeah, it was a very important part of the book, was to making sure that I got a lot of the details right, and to make sure that none of it was outdated. I want to make sure that I was presenting the most up-to-date perspective.
Was definitely an up-to-date perspective. It was believable. It was great the way you wrote it. It was such an awesome adventure. I just couldn't put it down. And I really felt like I was learning more about just dinosaurs in general, the plant life during that time. So tell me about the terrain and world building, because it seemed to incorporate some of Great Britain, a little bit of Scotland. How did that help you?
There was a lot of research in the world building as well, actually, particularly when we talk about in the past, when we are, 6 to 8 million years ago in what is now Colorado. Obviously, it didn't look like, Colorado does now. It was a very different place. So there was a lot of research into what the terrain would be like, what the vegetation would be like, and what we kind of settled on is that it was predominantly forested, but quite sparse compared to what we would have now. And yeah, there were a few details put in for dramatic effect, if you like. There is a volcano which forms quite a major part of the story. There isn't necessarily evidence that there was one, but that was more trying to capture the environment of the world as a whole within the setting that we had available. So some things from a wider area were brought in more locally, just to give that breadth of knowledge in the one place.
It was great. It had wonderful twist. It denier hopped a little bit with sci-fi, fantasy. There's a little horror mixed in there.
Yeah, and I think that probably stems from my reading preferences, is that I don't tend to read a genre. I tend to read quite a number of genres, and so when it came to writing a book, I think it probably comes more under sci-fi than others, but I think horror in particular, there were certainly horror elements of the book. And yeah, I like reading horror, and therefore I found that I really enjoyed writing horror scenes. So yeah, that was fun.
Okay. It was fun to write the horror part.
Does that make me a sadist?
I'm not sure. But it was really well done. I think that even middle school and high school would really get a good... It was just written in such a way that I think those age groups would enjoy it.
I hope so. That I kind of aimed for that. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too mature, because I think the subject material is inherently fascinating to younger people, probably more so than for adults. So yeah, that was the age range that I initially thought of. But I think it's quite grown up too. Certainly with some of the themes that kind of run throughout.
Definitely. But I think, I don't know, I just love the way it was written. I think that all of these age groups could definitely just get into it. It was really interesting. especially if anybody likes dinosaurs. It was just so flawlessly done. It was an adventure. It was exciting. You had all these different personalities and characters. How did you create the characters?
So the characters were probably the thing I found most difficult actually about writing the book at first. I think early drafts, I found characters were quite flat, quite two-dimensional. So I then spent probably the majority of the time that the book took on really refining those characters. They're mostly based on a kind of blend of people that I know in real life. So no one character is any one person.
Right.
But I've kind of taken, some of the best, and if we're being honest, some of the worst aspects of people's personality, and kind of blending them together. And I think that's how it helped to make those characters feel quite real, because it's easy to write how you think someone would react if that's a real person who you know.
That's true. I thought it was really well done. I love the characters because they mimic some people that we meet in real life now. Like maybe a little Elon Musk in there, which is the reach. It was pretty cool.
Yes. For I won't say who that particular character was actually based on in real life, but it was a famous billionaire.
So, what other real past events did you incorporate in? Because there was a lot of things that seemed somewhat familiar.
Yeah, I think it was a blend of a number of things, and also of sort of hypothetical scenarios. Without going into too much detail, the shipyards that I've worked in, we always have exercises and scenarios about what could go wrong, where potential holes are, and particularly with if there was potential for sort of malicious actions.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it was based on these kind of hypothetical scenarios that we are trained on, and if I kind of brought that forward into the book itself. So yeah, that was quite interesting to do.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like those were scenarios which had happened because I'd kind of acted them out in training. Yeah.
What about building things? Because there were a ton of repairs that had to be done at different points. It sounded, or it seemed like you might have a background with putting things together. Was that just from the shipyard, or are there other things that you do that are mechanical?
Yes. Yeah, I am somewhat of a classic car fanatic. I've spent, since I was relatively young, I've spent my time fixing up cars and old cars, and so I think particularly with our main protagonist Sid, who is in himself a field mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that experience was brought over to him, and to show there were a lot of mechanical or technical issues which were there partly for pure dramatic effect, but it was also to show that he was an integral member of that team and that he was required. It was a little reminder that he needed to be there, and he wasn't just a sort of fly on the wall character.
I thought you did that with all the characters. They all had important roles and they all did things extremely differently.
Yeah, that was, you obviously want to kind of manufacture some conflict within a group of characters, and the easiest way to do that is to make them inherently different, both in their personality and how they approach problems, and how professionally they approach things too. And yeah, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't an overly it wasn't too busy of a cast. So as our field team is just 4 members. I think in real life, if that was to happen, you would probably send more people than that. But I wanted to make sure that I had few enough characters that I could focus on each one individually and give them a suitable character arc and really explore how they would interact with each other when they're, confined in a way. They have the whole world to themselves, but they're also kind of restricted to where they can go.
I know. And the backstory on one actually almost brought me to tears at one point, but you understood the choices that he made.
Yes, I know who you mean. And that's probably the more interesting backstory. I think he was the only character that I went into great detail on a backstory on. Because, when it comes to villains, I've never really felt taken in by, antagonists who are just bad for the sake of being bad. I always feel like you have to believe and you have to understand why. You don't have to justify their actions, but I did like to give the reader some understanding as to why certain people did certain things and why they behave the way that they do.
So, how did you get into writing? Because you did such a great storyline. You had these things that came up, and it stuck with us so that by the time things start to unravel, you really understand why people are making the decisions they're making.
To be honest, this book was really my first go at writing. When I was very young, 12, 13, I would write short stories. But other than that, this was my first real delve into it. I think COVID, the initial lockdown, was a big. That gave me some encouragement in the sense that I didn't really have anything else to do. Like a lot of us, I was kind of locked in the house. So yeah, I wanted to get all that dinosaur knowledge out there and down, and I thought I would like to write a book. I think that would be cool. I didn't really expect much to come from it, if I'm honest.
Really? It's such a great story. Are you going to do any more? Is there going to be a series?
So I'm currently writing a different book, so I'm not writing a follow up at the moment, but I do have plans for a second for a sequel to the Lazarus Taxa. It's such an interesting concept for me to explore, and I feel like it could be applied to so many different characters, different scenarios, different time frames. I mean, this in particular is, we travel to the late Cretaceous, and that was really, that time period was chosen because I wanted to rectify some of the things that I think are wrong with most modern media when it comes to dinosaurs. But there's so much else out there that I would like to explore. So yeah, I would like to keep these books as self-contained stories, but I think a series of maybe 3 or 4 books is quite reasonable in the next few years.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. What other type of books are you working on?
So at the moment, I'm working on a more fantasy-focused book. And it's a story which follows a young girl as she kind of delves within a world that's within her own subconscious, aimed at a younger audience, although not still a relatively mature book. And it's I wanted to aim for more of an emotional book. It's about this girl. She's trying to save her mother. Her mother is sick. And as with the first book, paleontology is a huge influence because I have that base of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So our kind of fantasy world is filled with those creatures. It's an interesting book. It's very different from the first, so we'll see how that pans out.
Wow. Do you have children yourself?
I do. I have two, and I have a third on the way in August. Um,
Congratulations.
and I think, yeah, I think that was the reason why for the next book I wanted to write something for a slightly younger audience. I wanted to write a book that my kids could read, because I think at the ages they're at just now, the Lazarus Taxa would traumatize them a little.
A little.
So,
But I think they'll love it when
best
they're in
wait
middle
until they're a
school.
little older.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I'll give them a few years.
That's wonderful. And what, for world building, what parts of Great Britain and Scotland did you incorporate into it? Was there anything in particular?
Not in terms of where the majority of the book takes place, but certainly when we focus on the facility in England,
Mm-hmm.
that was very much based on where the British space agency, that's where they're based, because I thought to myself, what's the closest thing in real life to somewhere which has a time machine? And I thought, space exploration is about as close as we have at the moment to that sort of technology-driven exploration. So yeah, the Genesis facility was very much based on where the British Space Agency currently is, which is effectively in the middle of nowhere in the English countryside, which seemed the most logical place for it to be.
That's true too. But did the British Space Center actually buy out a town?
No, that
No.
was completely fictional.
Ah, okay.
Now that actually that was based on a town near where I live. Actually, cannot remember the name of it, but there is a park near me which has a lake near where I grew up, and at the bottom of that lake there is an old town. Now, no one lived in that town at the time they built the lake, but I always found that really interesting to know that at the bottom of this lake in a park there is this old town. So that was the basis for that particular aspect of the story.
Oh, that's really cool. It's just really incredible that this is your first novel and you were able to incorporate and draw so much emotion out of us while teaching us a lot about dinosaurs.
Thank you. That's yeah. I guess that's the goal. But yeah,
Well, you definitely
it's
nailed
it's
it.
really I'm glad. Yeah, I think I certainly, to me, when it comes to any sort of media, if you can make the reader cry or run away, then that's a success. So, I hoped to kind of elicit those strong emotions in some way or another, but also to give it some diversity in what emotions you make the reader feel. I don't want to bum them out for a whole book. Um,
No, I mean
I want to.
it was facts. I think we were trying to survive with the characters at different points. You had that emotion, but then you were still in overdrive, like the adrenaline rush that would happen when you were in different situations. So that was exceptionally well done.
Yeah, I enjoyed exploring that. That kind of feeling of isolation that the people that you are there with and stuck with, really, because that's a big part of what made the story interesting in my mind, is that because the time travel was such a rudimentary technology at the time,
Hmm.
they were stuck there for 6 months. They couldn't just go for a few hours and then, disappear home.
Right.
They were trapped there with each other. They had to rely on each other for their own survival. They didn't necessarily get on, certainly not all the time. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic between the characters.
Oh, that's true. But how did you find time to write it? I mean, with restoring classic cars, having 2 children, another one on the way, and you work full time in a very cool field, by the way. When did you find time to write almost, oh gosh, over 400 pages?
With great difficulty. I find that the hardest part about writing is finding the time. But I'm somewhat of a night owl. Most of this book was written probably between the hours of 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. And that continues to be my writing schedule, to be honest. But it's when I have time, it's when I have peace and quiet, and I can just focus on writing without any distractions. So, yeah, it works for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing so much about yourself and how you created the Lazarus taxa.
Thank you for having me. It's been really interesting.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep asking questions. And if and want to learn a little bit more about them and the errors they were in, this book will not let you down. The Lazarus Taxa. Get ready to be swept away.